So last day of the last session, you guys are brave souls. Hopefully we'll get some energy going on stage here. I'm so excited to be here. I found out, I'm going to just put my product here for a second. I found out about 10 years ago that I got really sick. And 10 years ago, a lot of stomach issues, pains, and then a few years later, I was diagnosed with a bunch of food issues and food intolerance. So that's what really got me interested in looking at food as medicine and food transparency. And so today, what I'm going to talk about is this future of food transparency for better understanding what's in our food and understanding also how our bodies are reacting to food. And we think about digital health. I think this is a really, really important topic. There's a lot of focus on how we're measuring our movement, our energy, but I think that the idea of knowing exactly what we're eating and how we're nourishing ourselves, there hasn't been that much innovation. And I'm going to talk about some of the emerging innovation. But before I do that, let's just pause and think about our bodies as an operating system. We're at CES, I think that's relevant. And we have nutrition, we have movement, we have hydration, we have sleep, and of course, the last session, we have also our mental health, that's also a really important part. And when we think about all these aspects, we track energy. Well, we've been doing it for a while now. First pedometers, they've been getting a little fancier. The Fitbit IPO this year. If you guys, how many of you actually walk the floor to see the wearable space? I mean, a lot of you. It's like football fields of wearables, and it's becoming an explosion of a space because it's adding value to people's lives. It's changing behavior. People are walking more, they're tracking, and it's changing behavior. But when we think about the other side of that, which is fuel, let's call it how we're nourishing ourselves, and we think about the innovation and really understanding food, well, you look at the nutrition label, and the calorie counter is bigger and bolder. In a way that it hasn't been done before. So there's some innovation, I guess. And then what are we actually tracking and counting? Well, calories, most people are counting calories. And calories are still just an imperfect way to measure food. I mean, I think it's just imperfect and simple way to measure. So our fuel is also complex. When you look at your average cheeseburger at a fast food restaurant, it's made from over 100 ingredients from over 65 countries. That's including the spices, the meats are coming from a ton of different cows from all over the world. So it's really, really complex. I hope you guys don't stop eating cheeseburgers, but these are the facts. And then from an ingredient standpoint, ingredients travel an average of 1,500 miles a day to reach your plate. So food is complex.
Yeah, one at a time.
It's hard to know exactly what's in our food. There are a lot of hidden threats in our food, including additives, pesticides, and allergens. We don't really know what we're eating. And the concept of what's good for us keeps changing. Look in 1970 when we have this nutritional pyramid. You can see we have the carbo load, wide base, and then we have the veggies and a certain amount of fat. And then in 2005, we issued the My Pyramid, a little less focus on those carbs, more evenly distributed across a number of the different food types. And now we have Choose My Plate, big focus on veggies and greens. And so this is what is good for us keeps changing. And then what's good for you? What's good for you individually? And that's totally confusing. You can see the confusion reflected in this Google chart of trends. So you can see people searching for gluten-free, fat-free, sugar-free, paleo. Atkins took a dive in 2007. So we're confused. And we don't know exactly what we're eating. And this is just the perfect time to introduce this entire series of innovation on what we're actually eating, understanding better how we're nourishing ourselves. I'm going to talk about some of this emerging tech and the quality of food. And I'll also specifically get into what I'm doing with our company. So first, in terms of quality of food, we're going to talk about food sensitivities. People care about how sensitive they are. They care about allergies. They care about their personal health profile. And then when we talk about food transparency, there's treatment, there's nutrition, and there's safety. And that's how I'm going to frame the discussion about food transparency. So treatment, how food is processed. There's 2 innovations I've highlighted here. The first one is Lapka. It's a little sensor that allows you to test food and know whether or not it's organic. So it's measuring pesticides. Lapka was actually sold a few years ago. It's a very design-focused company, but that has actually been on the market. It's on the market. They discontinued the line once they started selling the product, but it was a really interesting product to introduce this concept of whether something, putting the power in the hands of consumers to know if something's organic or not. Baidu is a concept that's out of China. There's a big issue with cooking oil in China. It's cross-contaminated. A lot of people use really, really bad ingredients in that cooking oil. It gets people sick, kills people. So Baidu has introduced this concept of putting sensors on the tip of your chopstick. So when you go to grab, you can actually detect whether or not something harmful is in that food. Then when we get to content, all right, what is in my food? Scie's a really, really awesome, interesting company that's using spectroscopy, looking at the molecular level of what's in your food, light refractions, and at a high level say, all right, what's the breakdown of sugars, estimate of fat, et cetera. And then SmartPlate is actually, it's using cameras and photo recognition technology and scale to get a sense of how many calories are actually on this plate. And it's a physical plate that you would take with you. So we're getting a little more sophisticated about thinking what is in my food. And then, of course, where we come in. So I failed to mention this when I got up on stage. I founded 6 Sensor Labs because I have all these issues with food. I wanted to better understand what I was eating, and I was very interested in knowing what was in my food at the level of allergen. So, gluten, dairy, egg, soy. And our first product that we're bringing to the market is Nima. It's a portable device that allows you to take a sample of food, put it in this little sensor, and then in a few minutes you'll know yes or no whether or not a trace amount of that protein was detected in that sample. And so we're starting with gluten and then extending into peanut and dairy. And then we're also developing an app where you can actually share that test result and create this whole internet of food that goes beyond the menu item. It goes beyond the nutritional information. Food Sniffer is another really interesting innovation. It's looking at whether or not your food has gone bad. And so it's using a sensor that can tell you, all right, I'm not sure how good this meat's going to be. So that's around food safety. So that was the majority of the content I had to share with you guys this Friday afternoon. I kept it short. I wanted to make sure that you all got introduced to this incredible emerging space of food technology and food transparency. And as I mentioned, so our company, 6 Sensor Labs, our first product is Nima. It's on pre-sale right now, so you can order it, and we'll be shipping it this year. So if you have anyone who has food sensitivities or food allergies, we welcome you to go to nimasensor.com and pre-order it. And I don't know if we're taking questions, but if there are any questions, I think that's all I had for today. Okay. Thank you.
Given our 10 minutes, where's innovation in the front lines? I think that's the title. So first is, who wants to be a patient in the room? How many people relate to being patients? Small number? Okay, one person, patient. Most people don't want to be patients. None of us are patients. We all want to live healthy in our homes. And every stage of care that you need to go to is really a struggle. It's more anguish, it's more complexity, it's more cost. And this is my favorite chart that we ever show at Independa because it's a backwards chart. You pay less and you get more in life if you can stay where you want to be and be as healthy as you can be. So just keep that as a premise. It seems like a simple fact. What's happening on the front lines is technology and healthcare and the consumer are all converging. So that middle area there is the sweet spot as it explodes out. Now, I was presenting a couple days ago at the Connections Conference, and also all of us have heard this. It seems to me like this is the year. And I didn't say that last year, and I didn't say that the year before. But this is the year. And in my opinion, the reason it's the year in the front lines is actually because our payment system is changing. So all the innovation that we've done, everything that we've done is fantastic, but we have $3 trillion of healthcare expenses, 17% of our GDP going to 20 and hopefully coming back, and we just can't go on like that. So the jig is up, and one of the key numbers that I actually learned recently, but it's amazing to me. 2011, at the end of 2011, we had almost none of our payment from CMS was value-based. By the end of 2015, just a couple, last week, 2 weeks ago, we had 30% of our payments were value-based. By the end of 2017, we're going to have 80% of our payments be value-based. What does that mean? Value-based means the transaction is not getting the payment. Keeping you away is going to get the payment. So that first slide to where we all want to be is now finally where the healthcare system is going to put us, which is where we want to be, instead of wanting us back. What that means is the consumerization of healthcare is now going to get paid for. You're going to have hospitals become insurance companies. You're going to have telcos get in the business of providing health. And you're going to have caregivers getting paid. And the technology that needs to happen on the consumer side is actually not swimming upstream anymore. Like we, as a country, have been swimming upstream. If you're in Canada and the rest of the world, it's actually not that way. You're actually very aligned. But we're finally there. So that's the big thing in the front line. What we think is the sweet spot in terms of the expenses in the healthcare system. 76% of the cost is chronic conditions. Most people know that. And then a huge percentage of that is for the elderly. We all kind of can intuit that. What is the number one issue for the elderly? We're going to audience participation, end of the day. Any guesses? Loneliness. Loneliness, isolation, depression. Clinically proven to lead to self-neglect, then lead to medication neglect, and lead to frailty, et cetera, which then lead to medication and recidivism back into the system and falls and other things. Now, why has this been going on? Because there was no CMS code for loneliness and isolation. But there sure could be an ambulance coming and picking you up and fixing you if you fell. So what we're doing in our system is actually going much further upstream to say, how do I prevent? So I'm going to quickly go through a few things. One is, it's really important to leverage the care and love and the efforts of your social network around you, which in the system we never did. So if a doctor released you in the past, they would actually have a check mark and make sure they don't get sued, and they would tell you to sign off on that, and off you go, whether it was a clinic or a hospital. Now they really don't want you back. Before, it was okay as long as they didn't get sued. If you were a CEO of a hospital, you wouldn't ask your investors to be sitting in this room and pitch the great new Taj Mahal that you're building and tell them how you're going to keep the beds empty. You would have a plan to keep the beds full. Now, if you're a CEO of a hospital, especially in 2017, you want to see those beds empty. Hospitals are actually selling floors to senior living communities. So the hospital beds are going to go lower, and that's where we all come in is, how do I keep the elderly where they want to be? Well, there's a huge family component that the doctor can now leverage, the hospital can now leverage, with picture sharing, with video chat, with tools like life stories, but engaging someone. If you're isolated and lonely, what's the one thing that you're doing all day? Thinking. If you're very cerebral, there's something else that you do also. TV. You're in front of the TV. That's the one technology that we, from Independa standpoint, is the holy grail to actually access and get to the right people. You're not in front of a tablet, you're not in front of a computer, but you're in front of that TV. That's why you're isolated. And if you're 80 years old, it's very difficult to learn anything new. So how do we then leverage that technology to get you engaged with your family? So that's the first premise. Social engagement helps you be less isolated, keeps you where you are. Second is organizational engagement. So if you're a hospital, or if you're a senior living community, or if you're an insurance company, how do you engage that population management approach now from a distance? How do you know little things before they become big things and big problems and expensive things? How do you have a visual interface with someone? How do you know if somebody hasn't stepped on the scale? How do you actually give compliance videos that someone can actually, when they're watching TV, it pops up right on their TV? So the second part is all the telemetry and integrated remote care in the bottom. By the way, it's not just medical, it's really about health. It could be the wearables, it could be someone's in the bathroom for 2 hours, it could be someone didn't open up the refrigerator for a day while they were walking around, they got out of bed 5 times. So combining all of that at the bottom, but how do you actually affect engagement from a distance? Just like the daughter, but now you're a hospital. So combining all these three, leveraging the TV as a healthcare device, so in our case, LG is an investor, And whether you buy the TV that's an LG TV, whether it's at the foot of your bed in a hospital or your senior living community, or someone buys it for their mom, or you can get a set-top box that connects to any TV. And we call that the Independa Any TV Companion. So those two really make it meaningful in being able to engage with someone. And actually, we had our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Richard Delapena, walk in. This is one of his favorite slides, if not the favorite slide, and it's his slide. And it's all about how you actually manage someone's life in a holistic way, in a person-centric way. And when we talk about wearables and we talk about data, it really doesn't matter if you have 10 different gizmos and gadgets and the data is within each manufacturer and within each gadget. What matters is how can you holistically look and set thresholds and alerts and catch those little things across maybe walking as well as sitting in the bathroom as well as not eating and so forth. And to do that, you know, this area, I don't know if we have the laser on this, but just on the medical, there's a whole industry around that called telemedicine. We all know that. Environmental, Internet of Things, all the sensors, all the data that you can get around a person. Cognitive tools. Social, we already talked about. But if you're trying to manage someone from a distance and you're trying to manage 6 or 7 vendor relationships, then that's where the anvil becomes impossible and becomes costly and complex. So the right platform really has to have all of it included in one and give you a single view for enterprise management to reduce costs of healthcare. And in our opinion, that's what the right platform looks like, which is a HIPAA-compliant FDA Class 1 cloud, integrated with other data so that you abstract the hardware. So, you know, next year we're going to be faster, cheaper, better all the time. The TV being the hub that you can engage everyone with. And by the way, if they're not on the TV, they get reminded using the second platform that they use, which is a telephone. And then you combine health devices with home sensors on the care recipient side, and then the caregiver on the one side could be an organization or a professional. On the other side is a circle of care, which is the family members. And this is the secret sauce, in our opinion, that actually reduces cost and catches things when no one's around the person. If you have someone loving you and caring for you and they're with you all the time, you don't need Independa. And you're probably going to be just fine in terms of catching things. But if people are not around, which is what happens when you know, daughters and sons are at work and granddaughters have moved and so forth, and you're alone and you lose a spouse, that's where the platform becomes disrupted. So that's all I had, and handing it back to our host.
And thank you all for staying. I appreciate it. So Linear Dimensions is a cognitive analytics company. We do cognitive machine learning. And so we're a group of analog IC guys and algorithm guys who saw a need several years ago in that there were all these new sensors coming out. And when people try to apply them, when device makers try to apply them, they were having a lot of problems in real world situations. So noise, motion, battery life, you had these wonderful little sensors, but nobody could make much use of them in form factors and with data that we wanted. So they were glitchy, error, didn't have long battery lives. And so the combination of what we can do with analog and mixed signal chips and algorithms gives us a unique opportunity to address that, and we've done that for many years at the companies we were at. And so we went out to find problems to solve. And one of the first companies we ran into was Body Media, who were later bought by Jawbone. And they had a band that went on the upper arm. And they'd been trying to get ECG out of that application and struggling. And it's a great application for us because it's one of the noisiest, worst environments you can try to get data out of. Because firstly, when you move, there's a lot of muscle noise. So they wanted full run on a jogging track with ECG coming out of it. Normally you go to the hospital, you get shaved, gelled, all the rest of it to get an ECG. They wanted it out of the arm during a full run on a jogging track. So we had EMI from the jogging track. We had the arms running. When you started sweating, the thing would start moving around and sliding. It would connect. It would disconnect. The impedance would change when the sweating occurred, so it was a disaster. And so we introduced our cognitive machine learning to this application, and we were able to actually get clinically proven full run on a jogging track over large sample of people on the upper arm. And so with that success, we moved on and put it into all kinds of form factors, bands, watches, other reference designs, which we now have. And so then we went looking for new applications. So the next one that came up was smart glasses. We worked with one of the major smart glasses people, And they wanted to take your physiology from the edge of your frame in a really tiny form factor with a really tiny battery, and your frames would all jiggle around when you moved, and they just were struggling. So we started with a normal photodetector, and we found that it would get saturated on many people's heads, and it was very hard to get a signal. And so we developed a photodetector that blocked the light from the side, but also worked with our analog cognitive machine learning to get the signal out. And we were able to solve that problem using lasers in our photodetector and our algorithm and interface chips. So then we moved into smaller signals like brainwave and ECG and so forth. And then last year, our chip came out, which has all of the loops and fast response kind of things that try to chase the waveform. So then we worked on apps to work with all this, and now we're into a security era that's really growing. And this year we're excited about our new chip, which is a completely analog neural network. So it's an analog neural network that uses charge shuffling to do the math. So where a digital DSP system takes 2.5 million cycles, for example, to analyze the heart or get the ECG out, we can actually do that in 2 cycles because we do everything in parallel. And so what does cognitive analog analysis do for us? Well, it bypasses the digital domain, and you've all been trained that's a great thing, but it's actually not, because digital is actually very inefficient. So our analog neural networks are ideal for pattern search and matching. They're not ideal for absolute math, but for heart waveforms, physiological waveforms, they're great. So what does it mean? It means we can be up to 1,000 times faster for the same power than a DSP, which means for the first time we can enable PC-like processing on these tiny little devices. So at Linear Dimensions, we actually believe that this is the only way that digital health devices and portable IoT devices are really ever going to do the processing needed to get you guys what you want for these kind of small consumer devices. So to give you more of an example of cognitive analog analysis applied to digital health, we have products that will take sensors, for example, electrical and optical signals, and they'll come into our chip. So we'll measure things like galvanic skin response, ECG, EMG, and that'll come in, and what we'll do to it is we'll actually map that into 3D images. So we actually map into a wavelet domain, which is a time-varying frequency domain with other information, and produce topographical maps, and we do transforms on that information to actually highlight certain things about it. And so in the early days, back with body media, even for the kind of fitness bands, a lot of people were having trouble with motion artifact when your foot fell. That would get confused with the heartbeat and so forth. And so what this mapping does is it actually separates out the noise from the signal of interest, much as you see in those images. So those are 3D topographical maps. So we don't filter. So this is a hard thing for people to comprehend. A lot of people filter, but filtering ruins the information. We separate it by mapping it. And then you need a lot of processing, so the only way to process it is to do it in analog, otherwise it uses too much power or takes too long. So this is a system for an example of how we might do this. So we have an iPhone 6 case. That iPhone 6 case contains this multi-dimensional analog cognitive AFE, analog front end, and then our algorithms. And they work very tightly together to do real-time closed-loop feedback. So what this does is it lets us actually chase the signal where a lot of other people zoom out, digitize at a very high bit rate, and then send the information to an external device to try to process it and send it back. The problem with doing that is it takes too long to send it out, process it, and send it back. So you lose the closed-loop dynamic, which means you really can't keep up with the signal, firstly, and secondly, the energy required to, or power required to send it out and back is too much. So we do this analysis in the analog domain. Only when we're finished do we go ahead and send it out to the digital world like your iPhone or something like that. So how are we changing people's lives? Well, one example is we're putting people in control of their health. So these are just some examples of what we can do, but with a simple iPhone case that you just snap your iPhone into, we can do ECG, blood pressure, PPG, HRV assessment, stress. We have meditation apps that actually watch how you're doing and help guide you. UV, session tracking and analytics, fitness training, and many, many more. And so to create really simple devices that people can use like this puts them in control of their health. And we also have applications overseas where it's being used for remote doctoring, like in Bangladesh and places like that. So remote doctoring becoming the hands for the doctor as part of what we call it the AI physician, but also for yourself. That's another piece of it. The second big and exciting application is bioelectric security. You all know about fingerprints. Apple really made fingerprints a big thing a few years ago. They have a certain level of security, but what's happening right now is there's a lot of interest is you as the password. So it's a digital health application. So in the other case, we use this analog cognitive learning system to identify beats and map them in these noisy environments. Well, now we've learned what these heartbeats look like. We can actually use them to identify you. They become a fingerprint. And so we get equivalent performance to fingerprint sensors by using ECG, EMG, GSR, and those sorts of measures. And we bring them in and we create these contours, and those contours allow us to identify people. So the way we're changing people's lives is by making you the password. So there's a big push right now by the operating system companies, people like Google, Microsoft, and so forth. They're putting in standards to eliminate passwords. So people have said, well, people are never going to do that because they don't mind putting their passwords, but it's not really going to be up to the people because they're going to eliminate all those boxes where you type your name. Right now, cyber crime around the world is a $445 billion problem, and it's costing companies a horrendous amount. And they want to get people out of the loop because the fact is, nobody can remember a complicated password. So they use really simple passwords and dates and dogs and 1, 2, 3, 4 and things like that, and they can be hacked easily. So what they're trying to do is create these edge devices. So edge devices are things like voice recognition, bioelectric fingerprint, and so forth. And what they'll do is they'll take the place of these passwords and make you the password. So we can use them to combine with fingerprint for higher levels of security. Some purchasing organizations won't use fingerprint because they don't think it's high enough security. Otherwise, we can actually use it to replace fingerprint. It's about the fifth the cost of fingerprint because we don't have to buy the big piece of silicon, but we get similar levels of security. And so we've had a lot of customers use it in different form factors. You can use it on game controllers, TV remotes, clothing, glasses, anything that you can put two conductive pads on. On a phone, you can make the phone case one of the electrodes and the button the other electrode, and you can do fingerprint and ECG type authentication, bioelectric at the same time. So there's a lot of form factor opportunity because all you need is a film, carbon fiber, aluminum fiber, or metal, very low cost. You can do it for pennies. So getting rid of passwords and making you the password is one of the big ways we believe we're changing people's lives, and we'll continue doing so. So if you have devices, we hope you'll bring them and let us improve them with some of the technology. And we're at booth 74139, and we have demos if you have time to come see them. Thank you all. Thanks, Jill. Appreciate it.